Joining me now is Dan McTeague, head of Canadians for Affordable Energy and a general in this fight. Dan, I gotta can we take a little bit of a victory lap for a second here? Like, the war is not over, but I think we blew up a bridge and cut off like two of their supply lines here. Are you happy to see that this so-called EV mandate is at least being staved off for another year?
Yeah, I'm just surprised that they are too daft or perhaps too arrogant to suggest this was bad policy to begin with. Chris, you and I talked about this for years and knew it was going to wind up in this position. The fact that Carney seems to be undoing everything that Justin Trudeau and Guilbeault and McKenna did over the past 10 years isn't surprising. That he is not prepared to make a declaration to kill it off completely, I think is going to lead to more concern from auto manufacturers, parts industries, as well as dealers across this country that this bad smell hanging around everything is just going to continue going for some time, potentially destroying the automotive sector as we understand it.
So you mentioned a couple of names there, and I want to get to the palace intrigue in Shea Liberal in a second because I just can't resist it. But let's stay with the nuts and bolts here. So as I can tell from reading the articles, so as of right now, if you just woke up, okay, if you've been napping, before Carney made this announcement on Friday, starting in 2026, 20% of all new vehicle sales were gonna have to be battery-powered vehicles, meaning this is going to directly affect gas and diesel-powered vehicles and ultimately end with an entire government ban on the sale of new, normal, I would describe, cars and trucks in Canada. So this was already affecting the market, Dan. It was already messing things up at car dealership lot levels. These things weren't moving naturally. I think in the latest quarter, didn't the natural demand and sale of EVs drop to like 8 or 9%?
That's right. Down 40% from the second quarter this time last year. Those numbers just came out. I see that my friend Paul Vieira has sent me something suggesting that the numbers have pretty much cratered. And that's not just a reflection of concern. It's a reflection of the fact that those who mooch or need subsidies to buy these things aren't getting them now. Therefore, they're not going to buy them. And no one of the right mind would buy them. They're not a very effective vehicle. I mean, I've been in the automotive industry. I understand electricity. My family's been in it for about 80, 90 years in Whitby, Ontario. McTeague Electric, by the way. And I've worked in the automotive sector. This just doesn't make sense. It didn't 5 years ago. And it sure as hell isn't going to be going forward. So maybe a reprieve, but I think for a lot of people, those numbers are just too impossible to ignore. More importantly, and Chris, this is really central to all this. We talked about this back in November. When Trump came in, it wasn't about tariffs. It was just getting rid of the EV mandate in the United States. And with 90% of all your vehicles manufactured in Ontario and places like, to a lesser extent, Quebec and even BC, with that market now going and gone, you'll have an EV availability, all right. You have a glut of them that no one will want to drive because, of course, we already have golf carts in Canada.
Yeah, exactly. And to the point where I think a lot of folks are like, oh, well, if somebody chooses to buy them, that's fine. Yeah, that is fine. But one, don't put taxpayers on the hook for it. So they've been mooching off corporate welfare now for years, and it was going to cost people an arm and a leg. And even without, if you just take the tax credits out of it, if you're buying, say, a regular sedan versus another regular sedan, and you do the cost comparison between battery-powered and gas-powered, there was still close to a $20,000 price difference there. And so off the lot. And so for an average working family, of whom about 50% are in really dire straits right now in Canada, like they weren't able to afford those things. Further, we weren't going to be able to afford to power them. We don't have the juice to make these things go, and we don't have the money to build the juice towers to make these things go. The last time we did the math here, just raw math, if we switched all of the cars that we own right now, our private fleet of vehicles, over to electric, it would be like 14 new can-do reactors. That's just the start. That's not touch and transmission or the charging station. So this thing should have been dead in the water in November, exactly to your point. To this point, Dan, you've described it so well before, like really the auto industry, it's basically one industry that straddles a border. The notion that one huge side of it was going to completely walk away from this and us out on our little archipelago was still going to be able to make this thing work was irrational, wasn't it?
It was an exercise in magical thinking. And, I predicted the Bright Drop van plant would go. I predicted Stellantis wouldn't go, that the Ford plant in Oakville wouldn't go, that Lee Ion, or whatever the hell they call it, went bankrupt. Northvolt went bankrupt. We have examples of Lion Bus bankrupt. I mean, come on, folks, wake the hell up. What kind of world do you live in which the only thing that matters is if you can subsidize their building, subsidize their purchase, and subsidize their infrastructure? That doesn't work in a country that, Chris, you and I are going to be talking about in a couple of weeks, when Mark Carney finally has the intestinal fortitude to stand up and say, I'm going to present a budget, and I'm not going to parse it when it's over $100 billion. I mean, it's clear that the end is near, and that the decision that Carney made the other day shouldn't have been about extending it. It should have been damn well killing it, eliminating, gutting it, getting rid of it. I'm glad to see the Conservatives have picked up on that. I'm not surprised. They're practical people. But, the elbows up crowd can go figure out how to make more electric vehicles that the world doesn't want. And if they do want them, they get them half price from China, which we have tariffs on.
This is such a mess. I'll put it nicely, because we're on TV. So it's a complete mess. So the practical the practical side of me is trying to be strategic here and say, okay, give him room. Give Carney room to climb down out of this rotten treehouse that Trudeau built, okay? Because he can easily come in. He's got political capital, I would argue. You may disagree. I think he's got political room and capital to come in and say, wow, look at all this flaming wreckage. That was the other guy's plan. I'm the new guy. I'm throwing all this stuff in the dustbin, and I'm going to be a different sort of person. So there's that practical side of it. And then the other part of me that just wants to fight and bring things down when it's costing taxpayers money and infringing on their ability to choose the kind of car they want to buy is saying, just keep up the fight constantly. So right now at the Taxpayers Federation, we've put out a bunch of emails. We're saying right now is the time to bombard your member of parliament, especially if he or she happens to be a Liberal, saying, kill this thing now. Because dragging this on for a year, you know better than me. Will this still be affecting car dealerships? Like if I'm a car dealership owner and I'm trying to get, supply in, I'm just in purgatory now, aren't I? Or some form of limbo?
Well, I think for a lot of car dealers and a lot of car manufacturers, they have to deal not only with the elimination of this market, which won't exist at least for the foreseeable future in the United States, therefore completely removing the need for us to build vehicles in Canada altogether. It's that there's now an impact not on the electric vehicle, fantasies. There's an impact now on the existing construction and building of internal combustion engines. We're likely to have traded away the farm and for a handful of beans, and there isn't going to be some kind of thing growing out of the ground that magically makes us a better nation. We've done enormous damage to ourselves by going along and elbows up and to get along. And many people chose, Chris, to ignore you. And what I had to say over the years is that you cannot possibly get a nation like Canada, practically speaking, to involve itself in these kind of net zero nonsense. And there's a whole pile of them. We don't just talk here about, clean fuel standards which is the second carbon tax, the main carbon tax, which you and I have been on for years, and also electric vehicle mandates, emissions caps. Look, we have built and erected an ideal around net zero that says that this can be imposed on Canada willy-nilly. And if you're a government, worker and you got, decent pension and whatnot, you don't care. But for the rest of the country, it's a quick walk downhill. And in fact, we're tumbling.
I just got finished at the Canada Strong and Free conference, which was held here over the weekend in Calgary. And excellent conference. We had Jamil Giovanni come out. Brian Lilly flew out to interview Premier Daniel Smith. Lots of really great speakers. Tristan Hopper brought the house down with his weird mix of nihilism and humor. Premier Smith made a bunch of different points, as she often does. And she pointed out exactly what you were just mentioning there. Things like the cap on Alberta energy. They call it an emissions cap, but of course it's a production cap. And she mentioned the idea of banning the sale of normal gas and diesel powered vehicles and just how much damage this is doing. The West Coast tanker ban, Bill C-69, all of these things that have been strangling, especially Alberta's industries now for a decade. Now, I always try to have some white pills here or some optimism. Do you think can we reverse this damage? If everybody just kind of says, okay, the scales have fallen from our eyes, let's scrap this stupid mandate, let's scrap things like Bill C-69 and energy caps, can we resuscitate this thing? I think it is possible. It's just going to take a while, isn't it?
Well, we need to
Well,
put on
exactly.
the adult pants and take off the little boys' short pants because I mean it's not just the carbon taxes, it's not just the electric vehicle mandate, it's not just the emissions caps. OBPS, the output-based pricing system, it's an industrial carbon tax that already exists. That's got to come off too. We can't possibly compete against the Americans or anyone else when we have these kind of onerous impositions placed on us. And we also need the federal government, as the Canadian Taxpayers Federation has been very quickly to point out, that continues to borrow more money than it's taking in and leaving not just this, but many generations with a debt that we're never going to be able to come out. Why am I worried about this? Because damn it, in 1990, I was an MP and we had to fight that massive debt by basically throwing everything out, cutting back programs, cutting hospitals, loading down on provinces, dropping people's expectation of social programs to maintain the system because we saw this was not viable. In 10 short years, the cult that took over in 2015 despoiled all that. So Mark Carney can't talk just about the fantasies of net zero, get rid of the entire apparatus. He's now going to deal with a massive debt and get the economy running again. The only way he's going to do that is guiding manufacturing and get a lot more oil and gas sold to the rest of the world. And I mean pipelines that should have already been determined, should have already been approved today. And if anybody wants to stand in its way, fine. Get a legal and a physical bulldozer to push these people out of the way because they've done enough to damage the economy over the past decade and generations to come. That's not fair. That's un-Canadian, and we need to stand up against those people.
The Premier mentioned this very well. And the thing that was just sounded discouraging is that, again, it's the confidence. If you don't have a company looking at Canada with the confidence of like, oh yeah, I'm going to put my money there. I'm going to build that plant. I'm going to build that pipeline. Apparently, it's just floating really low right now. And to your point, unless Carney really turns a corner here, like a sharp heel turn, how are they going to instill confidence again, especially if you take a look at the United States where, Trump's going all guns a-blazing, right? He's trying to make it boom. He's not going to be putting an industrial carbon tax. Frankly, Obama abandoned his plan to have a carbon tax. He thought about it, but he didn't do it. So the states aren't going to do this anytime soon with this kind of crazy green lockdown situation to the economy. Like, do you think, I'll put it this way, Carney wrote this book, okay, while he was UN Special Envoy on climate stuff. Like, do you think he's got it to be able to do a big heel pivot on this stuff?
Well, he's got pretty much swallowed himself whole, but we've seen up to now he doesn't know how to make a decision. And his decisions are simply to temporary postpone or put off or delay. I mean, this is becoming the proverbial Mr. Dithers of politics, and he's far worse than anything I've seen. The big problem for Canada and its leadership and the woke types that took over and did their ESG, DEI nonsense for the past 10 years is that you really told the rest of the world, don't invest in Canada. And even if you did, there's no guarantee you're going to be able to cover it. So we built a pipeline, but it cost you and I $50 billion. The private sector would have done it for nothing, created the same amount of jobs and created the same opportunities. But no, we have a weak Canadian dollar because we got nothing. No one wants to buy anything in Canada. And, you don't have to go in beyond the economics. We flooded the country with migrants, 8 to 10 million over the past 10 years to make of Canada a real basket case. And I think, for those, work in the private sector, it's a struggle for those those that can survive. For those in the public sector, hey, believe me, the grim reaper of these bad politics is coming to knock on your door very, very soon. And you will lose your jobs because of your woke, ignorant, short-sighted views of the world. Canada does not function without its resources and manufacturing. The fact that we've done everything we could to crap on that industry and those industries is a reflection of the fact that we have seen a major decline in our standard of living. Job numbers are going through the roof. It's getting worse, not better. Mark Carney can do all he wants, all the jiggling and the dancing that he wants. At the end of the day, he's got to get rid of everything that he's represented since day one.
To your point, last 2 points. I'm going to get to Palace Intrigue to finish things off. But first, are you glad to hear Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, say we're going to keep on fighting the industrial carbon tax and we're going to keep on fighting the second carbon tax, which we call it the second carbon tax. It's otherwise known as the low carbon fuel standard. It's the reason why in British Columbia, it's still costing you, on average, it floats up and down based on the price, but on average around 17 or 18 cents extra per liter of gasoline and diesel. Trudeau, in all of his wisdom and genius, used British Columbia Columbia as a template. He looked at the price of gas in Vancouver and said, that's awesome. Let's make that across Canada. So he used it as a template across Canada. So the low carbon fuel standard, or the second carbon tax, is going to keep on increasing. Is it yearly, Dan? Across
yearly.
Canada? Okay.
Yeah, and not only that, ethanol. You got now 15% ethanol in gasoline, mostly in premium. So your mileage is going to wind up being, severely impacted. And you got a chainsaw, I had to fix one on the weekend here, all gummed up in the carburetor. You got a lawnmower, get rid of the gasoline at the end of the season, because guess what? You're going to wind up having to do some damage to the mechanism, the carbureted mechanisms. But beyond that, it also means that we're using food for fuel. We're now saying there isn't enough ethanol being produced in Canada. It's all coming from the United States. And so even if we want to have these great fantasies about the great things that we're doing, we're just making our Americans very rich and the rest of the world laughing at Canada. And you know what? We did it not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. So Canadians have no one to bloody well blame but themselves.
Unbelievable. For folks who want to see more about what Dan's talking about there, about the food, using food for fuel, secondstreet.org posted a great paper on this a few years ago. What if we kept it in the ground? Question mark. If we switched everything to plant-based plastics and all this stuff that a lot of people are pushing, what would happen? I forget the percentage, but the amount of arable land, meaning what you can grow food on, that would have to be required to replace petroleum, like mineral oil that we pull out of the ground otherwise, was astonishing. I wanted to quickly point out before I get to our palace intrigue, because it involves palace intrigue a little bit. I was noticing that when Pierre Poilievre made his big announcement saying we're going to continue to fight the carbon tax, this is the second carbon tax in industrial, he dug his heels right in, and good on him. Some of the, how would I describe them? I would say newer influencers, who I would generally say are on the right, were saying, hey man, that was the last fight. Pick up the new fight. Drop this carbon tax stuff. And so I felt like, Grandma Simpson here saying, no, pull up a chair, okay? Carbon taxes are the OG way for globalist governments to control your life. Do you want some big government taxing and punishing you for eating food, or for driving a vehicle of your choice, or heaven forbid, heating your home? If you're cool with that, then you must really love big government control, my friend. So I just wanted to point that out there for the kids these days who are watching this stuff. Pierre Poilievre was right to say, no, we're going to keep up the fight against carbon taxes.
And he should, because the last conservative leader didn't, and thought he'd trade a few Western votes for a few Canadian votes, and didn't get either. So at the end of all of this, the reality is that, and the practical reality is that for conservatives who are naysayers and think that we should go down this road, talk to your neighbors. Give the next few months. They're not as giddy, they're not as confident, they're not as cocky, and they feel frankly deceived by what Mark Carney and his guys represent. They were supposed to be the guys that stood up to Trump. They didn't. They caved, they took a knee, and at the same time, they're breaking down everything that they once represented. So I don't know. This looks like a liberal government that looks a lot more like a conservative government. Pierre Poilievre maybe should stop saying these things, because I'm pretty sure that within the next few months, Mark Carney is going to come around to his senses and adopt them as well.
Or steal his lunch. Yeah. Lastly, I can't help myself. Okay, so for folks who don't know, Dan McTeague was a longtime member of Parliament, a Liberal member of Parliament, and so he knows those hallways and where the bodies are buried and stuff. So let's just imagine. Say Mark Carney, Prime Minister Mark Carney, goes blue. He goes blue Tory. The central banker within him and his abacus takes control, and he starts really bringing down the cost of things. He starts, fighting to balance the budget, which would be miraculous, and we want him to do that. Do you see a split growing between the Stefan Guilbeault types, like the hardcore, like left, like we want to seize, gas-powered vehicles? Remember, they were floating the idea of a tax on pickup trucks, and we caught them doing it. Like, that sector of the caucus, I'm not talking the voters, the folks who are there, members of Parliament and cabinet ministers. Do you see, if Carney keeps going this kind of let's be practical direction, do you see a split forming there?
Well, they'll go back to their old selves. If Mark Carney won't, then they will. The Guilbeaults can go back to promoting Marxism and separation as he had in the past, or maybe dangling from bridges, towers, or maybe former premiers' homes. I don't know. And frankly, I don't care, because the guy shouldn't have been given that position to begin with in the first place. But it's only because of a cult that now pervades the Liberal Party, in which the leader is everything and everyone else who has an opinion is nothing. Look how long it took to get rid of Trudeau. I mean, it was god awful. The public didn't even want him. 6% support. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that we'll see people going back to their old selves, or maybe joining the old organizations that they thought could work well. But at the end of the day, sooner or later, charities are going to be audited. These charities that call themselves, foundations and whatnot, and do charitable work, it's all political activism. Someone's going to pull the pin on these people and finally get them the audits put back on them, so that they're investigated appropriately, because they're not doing charitable work. They're doing a lot of political advocacy, and as a result of that, making Canada a lot poorer. It's damaging Canadians. I know, of course, how this works, and to me, it's inevitable. Things are declining rapidly. No one is happy. No one trusts the Liberals. And if the Liberals among themselves want to fight, so be it. But there's nothing left of the NDP. There's really nothing left in terms of integrity on the left. They've despoiled the country, and they have to account for it.
Ideologically speaking, do you think if Carney starts doing stuff like this, say I'm dreaming, say he gets rid of the EV mandate or the ban on gas and diesel-powered vehicles, say he gets rid of the industrial carbon tax. I know I'm dreaming, okay? Just walk along fantasy land with me for a second. Say Carney does those things. Does this then leave more room for the NDP to have more flowers to pick and get some of its base back? Because Trudeau went so hard left, right, with a lot of these really dumb fiscal policies. Like, it was just astonishing that they didn't have a lot of room there, right? Because he was already doing that dumb stuff. Does this leave more of that stuff then ripe for the picking for whatever the NDP becomes?
Well, the efforts of previous governments to balance the books, to get the finances right, to get the economy going, and it's conservative and liberal, of over a decade, and shield us against, some global downturns, as well as, shield us well market-wise to make sure that we wouldn't be caught flat-footed again, as we were in the 1990s. Means that there is opportunity for the NDP to come back and to eat the Liberal lunch, because even Liberals are realizing that when they're out of work, they can't turn around and be trendy and cool and have the elbows up when, in fact, their pockets are bare. My concern is not about the NDP, because frankly, there'll always be room for quacks and weirdos on the left. But my biggest concern has been how we've lost the center, which brought people in who wanted to work, who wanted to, roll up their shirt sleeves and find pragmatic solutions, consensus building, completely lost in favor of ideologies that are extraordinarily negative to Canada, the WEF stuff that we've seen, net zero. Mark Carney's going to say, no, I'm nixing net zero. Once he does that, then I'll be glad to join again and to say this is a great thing, and he deserves those kudos. But the damage is done, and it's time for a new Prime Minister. And if Canadians don't believe me, they certainly didn't 13, 15, 17 weeks ago. They're sure as hell going to believe it now.
Dan McTeague, Canadians for Affordable Energy, thank you so much for your work on this fight. I think you should take a bit of a victory lap today, because there'll be more fight tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Kris.